Hello and welcome to the TMC webinar series. My name is John Hoyt. I'm the Solutions Consultant at TMC. And in today's webinar, we're going to be taking a look at Microsoft's Power BI. BI, of course, stands for Business Intelligence. I think you'll see the power of the tool as we go through the demo today. I find its name to be very accurate. Quick word about the licensing around Power BI. And I'll have a slide up at the end of my demo today that will have some more information about this. This is essentially an add-on product to the Office 365 package. An Office 365 license for each named user is going to be the starting point for their experiences with Power BI. There are essentially two models inside the Office 365 world. There are kind of personal and small business user licenses. For those licenses, Power BI is typically a $10 per month per user add-on to your Office 365 subscription. There are also some enterprise level agreements with Office 365. The E3 and E5 licenses should include Power BI already for users that are in that part of the Office 365 world. This is the third of 4 webinars that we're doing here in the month of August. We have completed and have recordings available already for the What's New in Dynamics GP. That was an overview of GP 2013 to GP 2018, new features, functions, and user experience updates. Last week, we did statements, ledgers, and analysis, the reporting tools available in the Microsoft world. We focused there on Excel refreshable reports, Jet reports rather, Smart List and Smart List Designer. Today is going to be Power BI and nothing but Power BI. And next week, we'll conclude the webinar series for August with a view of workflows, approvals, document imaging, and retention for those documents. That will be split primarily between Dynamics GP and Dynamics NAV. When we talk about any of the Microsoft Dynamics products going forward, Microsoft publishes these roadmaps, a review of what has been added to the product in the most recent releases, what is available as new features in the current version, and what they're going to be working on over the next couple of years. In the GP world, that is primarily now the top features requested by customers. There is a website on the Microsoft site where you can either post your own suggestions for improvements. You can also read the suggestions that have been put up by other GP users and vote, yes, I would like to see that function added or refined or corrected, whatever the case might be, in the future releases. And the top vote getters from that website is really kind of driving their development work right now, barring things like tax updates, payroll updates, things of that type. So let's talk a little bit about Power BI. As I mentioned, the licensing, it's part of Office 365, but the intention behind Power BI is to provide a large universe of users with access to primarily the ERP data in the background, Dynamics GP or Dynamics NAV or Dynamics 365 Business Central, whatever it might be. But you can also bring in other sources of information to the Power BI world and combine those different sources of information into your own reports and analytics. It is primarily a graphical tool. It can do column and row reporting, but it's not truly its strength or its intention. There are other tools in the reporting toolbox available that are probably better suited for doing things like financial statements. The real power in the Power BI world comes from its real ability to be accessed by anyone that you want to give access to and allow them to consume that information on the device of their choice, using the browser of their choice. We are agnostic in terms of hardware or software configurations for access to Power BI. So if you have directors that insist on using iPads, not a problem. They can get Power BI. There is read-only direct access to the data. It can be refreshed on demand by the end user, but it is read-only. There is no ability to update or change any of the underlying data coming out of the ERP systems. Power BI includes Cortana Business Intelligence. This is Microsoft's AI assistant, and you can pose questions to your data directly inside the Power BI tool, and Cortana will convert that into the appropriate filters or restrictions or sort order, whatever it might be. With Power BI, you can schedule and publish reports. There's a desktop editor, and that's where we're going to start the demo, that creates the essential data set and the first version of a report based upon that data set. That report can then be set to be published on a scheduled basis and delivered to a list of recipients. So I can push information out to store managers, directors, department heads, whoever it might be, and they'll receive that information automatically. They can also use the Power BI tool from Office 365 to access the reports on demand and work with those reports within their abilities and security. And finally, of course, because we are Microsoft and we know everybody ultimately wants to go play with the information in Excel, that is, of course, going to be a direct download, but we'll bring that down in a formatted way with the search restrictions, filters, table relationships, etc., already embedded into the Excel worksheet for you. So from there, let me switch over and we'll actually get started on the demo itself. So from my desktop, I'm going to start by simply going into the Power BI desktop itself. There are essentially two tools inside the Power BI world, in much the same fashion that you have both a report designer and a report viewer in something like Management Reporter 2012. The same concept and approach is used in Power BI. There is a desktop install and a data connection that gets established to my data, and then I can start to work with it in whatever form or fashion that I might want. There's a lot of similarity in the controls and the layout to something like Microsoft Excel, so I think most users will have a fairly comfortable experience here. But there is a bit of a learning curve that you'll go through the first couple of times you work with the Power BI desktop editor. And of course, the TMC consulting staff would always be available to help you if you need any of that assistance. One of the brilliant things about Power BI is the ability to do import-export. So we could create a version of a report or a data set for you based on our test system, export that to you. You can then import that in. We would need to adjust what database we're connecting to, but from that point forward, you'd be able to run that structured report as though you'd written it yourselves natively. So a lot of assistance in those ways. To get started in Power BI, the first thing I need to do is establish a data connection. And I can get data from a wide variety of sources and locations. It could be something local and something very simple, a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet, a text or CSV file. Anything that I might have local can be included as a data set. The Power BI data sets, that's everything that I've already built inside Power BI, and I could simply call up one of those again and reuse those. So the work I did initially can be leveraged repeatedly. Different versions of a customer sales history report, for example, can be built all from one common Power BI data set. If you're using any of the on-premise versions of the Microsoft Dynamics products and your SQL Server is on-premise, you can go directly to that SQL Server. From there, you can look at either the tables themselves or any of the Smart List table views that have been created. And we'll do a little bit of the table view work later on in the demo. Same thing's true with analysis services, but this is an add-on component to SQL Server that allows me to create essentially an analysis cube for faster reporting and minimal impact on my end users. Web. I could specify sources for things like current exchange rates on foreign currencies and point to a website where that information was available. I can include weather information from sites that include that detail, etc. And the OData feed is Microsoft's most recent version for data exchange. This is what we would use for connecting to a Dynamics NAV database or to a Microsoft Dynamics 365 database. Both of those ERP systems have the OData system or the OData capability already configured. GP is getting there. I think they've got everything now for both OData and OData v4, but I'll need to verify that with my technical team. If you've got any questions on that, you can reach out to us directly. The recent sources, these are the pieces that I've worked with recently, and I'm just going to go straight to my TMC demo SQL. This is my GP site and my Fabricam company. When it establishes the connection to that data source, the first tool that comes up is the Navigator. Because I'm connecting to a SQL database, it will show me here both the table views and the tables themselves that are available inside that database. Now, as you can see, we're looking at the direct table names here in each case, and that can be a little intimidating for some people, and that's why I said more frequently you'll use in the existing table view because they're named by plain English, and we have the ability to search directly for those or for a table name itself if that's the case. So if I type in just something like item, Power BI will go through the Navigator and search and find all of the different tables or table views in the database where that value is present. Even includes things like functions that I can call if there are particular values that I want to run or updates that I want to run. But it's vendors, sales line, purchase lines, the items, the item quantities themselves. I can expand out and see the data itself in a preview mode. If I look at item quantities here, I do get a message back in this case from Navigator that there's so much data in my database that it's only going to show me a truncated version of that. But I can choose to then go in and either load that and work with it directly, or edit will bring up the editor and I can first select how I want to get to my data. The import function creates a point in time data set and lacks the ability to be refreshed on demand. The directed query mode would be selected for a report that does require refresh on demand and the ability for the users to get an update whenever they need. There are some other distinctions available in the training guides and the manuals. For the purposes of today's report, I'm going to keep this simple and just do an import of data. What I get now is what we call our Power Query Editor. This allows me to build in the first level of filters or restrictions on the data set to determine what I do or do not want to include. If I'm using a SQL table view, I can probably skip a lot of this because most of what is going to be extraneous data records from the direct data tables has already been filtered out for me. But if I needed to do that for some reason, I could. And the remove columns function here will allow me to go through and specify which columns do I want to get rid of. So I can see my source, I can see where I've been, and then I can see all the different tables and the views that are in there. I back my way out of that query setting. And I've made one error. I'm going to back out and try that again. Let's load that into the tool. Now over on the right-hand side, I get the controls now to allow me to start to work with the data that I've requested. There are two columns here. The first column is the visualization. As I said in the opening, Power BI is intended to primarily be a graphical tool. It's to convert the rows and columns of figures that we have in the database into a more easily consumable visual, some type of KPI or metric, and I can choose which ones I'd like to have depending on which type of report I'm building. And I'm going to start in this case because I'm looking at my items and my item quantities. I'm going to build just a real quick little what's the item quantity on hand view. And I'm going to do that in this case actually with a grid, a table. So when I click on my visualization type, I get a preview of what it's going to look like. And then I can use the fields column over here and search through all the fields that are available and decide where I want to add in information. I'm going to start with the item class code, and you'll see that that now gets added as a value under my visualization. And from there, I could start to work with filters or drill throughs or anything else that I wanted related to the class code. In this case, I also want to have the item number. I want to have the item description. And then I'm going to scroll down a little bit and grab some of my quantities. I'd like to know what's the quantity on hand, what's the quantity available, and let's say what's the quantity sold as well. As I continue to add in fields, they get added into my values list. I'm starting to populate the information over here in the report, which I can now drag around and resize. And you'll see that Power BI is doing things like adding in column totals for me automatically, doing its best to be helpful. Now in this case, I want to do a couple of filters. I want to do a filter at the item class code level, where I want to see everything except my blanks. That change gets made, and I'm ready to move on, whatever the next piece might be. Now I'm going to leave that particular metric alone. If I click somewhere else on the workspace and click a different visualization, that will load for me. And just like I had before, I can now go through and select from my field values my item number, my item description, and then if I don't like the view that I've created, I can test different visualizations until I find the visualization that makes sense for the data that I'm including. To get my quantity sold. So how would you like to see the information presented? What metric or what value would you like to have include? Just like I did before, I can do the filters again. So in this case, I want to do a filter where the quantity sold greater than 0. If I scroll down to the bottom, I can apply my filter. And essentially now I can put together my top selling items list. I could continue to go through that same process now by either creating additional visualizations. I can add additional data sources or different tables or views from my existing ERP database. Once I have everything in place the way I want it, last step in the process is to come over here and say, I now want to publish this up to Power BI. It's this step that will make this data set and this initial report available to my end users, and they can access it through their Office 365 portal. Power BI, like all good Microsoft tools, then gives me my feedback. It was successfully published, and I'm given the option to immediately open it from here. I'll go ahead and click on that link. And it's going to take me to my sign in to Office 365. Now we've turned on two-factor authentication here at TMC, so I'm going to get challenged for temporary code. And now for the end user experience, it initially has a very similar look and feel to what we saw on the Power BI desktop where we were doing the editing. But again, I've now logged in through my Office 365 account. I've been taken directly into Power BI and directly into the report that we were just looking at. So this has now been published, and this is available for any of the end users to now start to work with. And there are a couple different things that they can do with this. You'll see in the top corner of each one of the metrics, there are both a pin function, and pin allows the users to create their own dashboards from any of the metrics or KPIs, the graphs, the reports, whatever you've put up there on a workspace or on an existing report. End users can group together either onto an existing dashboard or they can create their own brand new dashboard. So they can choose how they want to access this going forward, either as a standalone or part of a grouped together report. We also have next to that an expand out function. This allows me to see more detail about the report itself. And you'll see over on the right-hand side, there is an expansion out where I can now start to do my own filters. I don't have a lot of columns in this particular report, but I can start to go through and say, I want to know not where quantity sold greater than 0, maybe I want to know greater than 10. So working within the data set that was created on the editor, the end user can now start to go through and create their own. And every time they make a change, the visual will update for them. After they've done their exploration here, I can go back to the report itself. I'd have the same options, of course, available. Specify a detail. Hover over capabilities for a little bit of drill down information as we look at over our spaces. And then for the end user, if they move beyond the report that we created in the editor and they open up their workspace, this will be a listing of all of the Power BI elements that they currently have access to. And we group them together into a couple of different ways. The first views are called dashboards. And dashboards are intended to be quick summaries of information created by the user, grouping together whatever information or metric or graph chart was relevant to them. They can share these among themselves, rename them, copy them, add and remove values. That same function that we saw for drill down capabilities, where do I want to work with my information? The Cortana business intelligence shows up here, where maybe what I want to know about as I look through my sales information, just say, show me anything you can find sales in Chicago. Now in the background, the Cortana business intelligence agent takes over, converts that plain text request into a search string, and then goes through and finds every bit of information that it can find in the data set that matches that value. It also showed me, as you saw there very briefly, a list of alternatives: sales in other cities, sales in states, sales in countries. So that Cortana business intelligence layer is available automatically inside the dashboards. It's also going to be available inside the reports. So here's a report that looks at customers, where I've broken down both a graphical view of their aging buckets. So I can see by customer name what's their current balance over the periods. On the right-hand side, I have a sales by territory. This is a map view, currently restricted to everything in the US, but I could add in other values or select everything. So whatever is the most appropriate way to visualize that information, that's going to be one of the keys in designing the reports initially, because now I give the end user the ability to see map of the world, hover over the totals, how am I doing, different states, different locations, etc. Reports have that same ability to expand out and see greater detail, a summary of the filters that are currently being used, the color coding, etc. And if I come down to the bottom of the values in the My Workspace area, we get to the data sets themselves. These are what were published initially from the desktop editor, and they don't at this point have anything in terms of predefined reports or dashboards or visualizations, but they give the user access to that data. And just like we had in the desktop editor now, the end user can work with the same tools, the same controls, and build their own visualizations, build their own reports. The only thing that cannot be done from here is adding in a new data connection. That's still going to be a task done on the Power BI desktop editor. But for all intents and purposes, beyond that, if you give the users access to the data set themselves, you've given them the ability to create their own reports, their own metrics, their own dashboards. And I'll remind everyone what I said at the beginning, this is read only. There is no way for them to change the data or update the data. The data will remain secure in the background. Now, if they want to work within the data sets themselves, but they don't want to build their own visualizations and build their own reports, we have a couple tools available that they can work with. One of them is an Analyze in Excel tool. This is a connection between Power BI and the user's local desktop version of Excel, and it will take the data set out of Power BI and create in Excel a Power Pivot for them. So if their preference is to do analysis or graphical presentation, whatever it might be, or I need to create something that is designed for maybe a presentation, a board of directors meeting or annual reports or something, you want to work in Excel, no problem. It's a straight export. We've already put together the pivot table, the relationships between the data sources. The user can now just start to build out that Power Pivot table just like they normally would. We also have a tool called Quick Insights. This will again leverage the Cortana Business Intelligence agent in the background. Now Cortana is simply going to go through the data set and look for relationships between different values or fields or tables. And once Cortana has finished crunching through the data set, you can view those insights. And Cortana will come back with a list of everything it found that may or may not be of any relevance, but it allows the user to make those decisions. And one of the things that I find compelling about the Analyze Insights is that it may find relationships between data that I wouldn't have thought to go look for myself. A relationship, for example, between the count of the state, how many records do I have in a particular state, and their credit limit amounts. May or may not be accurate, but it may be something I want to investigate further. So again, that ability to blow it out into a focus mode and see more of the information about it. And if I think it's going to be compelling, that ability again to start to pin it and just say, I want to create a new dashboard. That new dashboard could then have other objects or metrics added to it, both from this data set or from other data sets, because I can start to combine those different pieces together into a different view. And with that, let me switch back over to my PowerPoint. So to recap, Power BI, it's available with your Office 365 subscriptions. It is an add-on to most of the Office 365 versions that are intended for either personal or small business users. And typically the add-on for that is about $9 a month. It is, however, included in some of the larger enterprise E3 and E5 licenses for Office 365. If you have any questions about your licensing, feel free to reach out to Jim or myself, and we can do some research and help you figure out exactly where you are and what you would need in order to get Power BI enabled for yourself and for your team. The other point that I want to remind everyone about in terms of licensing, there are zero licensing requirements for Power BI from the ERP perspective. That is, you can open up Power BI to as many of your employees or users as you would like, with no impact on their ERP licensing. The logic behind that being that with Power BI, the Power BI user is only accessing a data source and never touching the ERP software directly. And because of that distinction, there is no requirement for an ERP license. So again, all they'll need is a Power BI license, available a couple different ways, and then access as you grant it to the data sets. And that takes me to the end of today's webinar around Power BI. Thank everyone for their time and attention. A reminder that next week we'll be doing the workflows and document imaging webinar, which will conclude our August webinar series for this year. And recordings are available for any of the webinars you might have missed. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'll look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.